Question. Dear Kim, what is your take on people in a spiritual movement idolizing the teacher in the movement? I found myself being the odd one, yet again, first in the general world, now in a spiritual movement, as I could not agree with people taking every sentence that the teacher said as the Holy Bible, so to speak. I mean, I respect the teacher, but I could not bring myself to praise every action, every word that comes from the teacher. I do still like this spiritual movement, though, and I do not want to leave. What do you think I should do in such a case? I had to laugh because you are not wanting to do everything that that particular guru says, teacher says, but now you're asking me what to do. I don't think you should do anything, because I haven't set myself up as a spiritual teacher who wants people to blindly follow what I say. But I will comment on the question, because I think it's very important. I have actually talked about it before. Personally, I think, based on my experience with several spiritual movements and observing spiritual people for a long time, that one of the biggest problems in spiritual movements is idolatry of the teacher. And you could look at it in a gentle way and say, there really isn't anything wrong with it. It's just a phase on the spiritual path. It's when people are new, when they are not really mature on the spiritual path, they tend to idolize the teacher. And the reason for this is simple, very, very simple, psychologically. They are not yet mature enough to take responsibility for themselves and make their own decisions. So therefore, they are projecting. Their subconscious minds, their subconscious selves, their egos are projecting. They want to project that the teacher is perfect. So if I do everything the teacher says, I'm going to make it to the goal, whatever they define the goal as in their movement. And again, you could say, I mean, can you ask a child to behave as an adult? No. So can you take people who idolize a teacher and tell them they shouldn't be doing this because they are immature? No, you really need to help them become more mature, and then they'll naturally make that transition. But of course, there's always the danger in a spiritual movement that when people idolize the teacher and uncritically follow everything he does and says that everything is right, they stop growing. So now, you could say, people at a certain level of maturity, once they grow to a higher level of maturity, they'll let go of the idolatry. But if the idolatry prevents them from growing to that level, you have a catch-22. And that is what you see in many spiritual movements. So my approach is always, growth is the only thing that matters. Self-transcendence is the only thing that matters. It's an ongoing process. Certainly as long as we are on this very dense planet, we need to continually transcend ourselves. And even beyond, we will always transcend ourselves. So, as I said, idolatry of a guru stops your growth. Because instead of using your intuition to make decisions, you're looking at what the guru says, and you are thinking that if I do everything the guru says, I can't do anything wrong. I could not agree with people taking every sentence that the teacher said as the Holy Bible. And this is the dilemma you put yourself into when you idolize a teacher, and when the teacher allows it. You have these organizations out there where they have this culture where it's built around this one teacher who's supposedly in a higher state of consciousness, and therefore implicitly everything he or she does or says must be perfect. It must coming from a higher viewpoint, whether you call it this or that. And there are several problems with it. The one problem is, of course, that if you believe that the teacher is always right or perfect, it can, if the teacher is abusive, it can lead to a very, very toxic environment where the teacher does things that are not right, but nobody can say it. Because you can always find there must be a reason why the teacher needs to have sex with any female student he likes. Or there must be a reason why there's abuse of power and why people are asked to give all their money to building whatever the teacher wants to build. I mean, you can excuse anything, and therefore, if you look at the history of cults, right, you can take any cult, even the one they always use, Jonestown. The cause of the problem and the disasters that happened was always idolatry of the teacher. People uncritically followed the teacher instead of increasing their own intuition, making their own decisions. So you have some very, very scary examples of this cult behavior and what it can lead to. I mean, it's what they... I remember in the United States, when I first moved there in 1987, there was this cult awareness network that was very active at the time. It was actually led by fundamentalist Christians who proclaimed that anything that wasn't their church was a cult, including the Catholic Church. But anyway, they always used this negative cult behavior to stereotype and say, this is how all spiritual movements are. But the problem with these very negative cults was precisely idolatry of the teacher. And so then you have some movements where it's not so extreme, where the teacher isn't abusive or the teacher doesn't do something that leads to a disaster, but you still have the idolatry of the teacher that prevents people from increasing their own discernment. Now, I've said it before that the goal of a spiritual teacher is really to take a particular student from wherever the student is at when he or she finds the teacher, and then raise the student up to a point where the student no longer needs the teacher. Because you now have reconnected to your own higher self and your ascended masters who are real teachers, so you are getting whatever you need from within instead of getting it from an outer source. I mean, I have worked now where, in a sense, I'm in the capacity of a spiritual teacher. And I've been that for over 20 years now. And I've counseled a lot of people, talked to a lot of people. But my goal is always to help them get intuitive insights so they can make their own decisions. I don't tell people what to do. I won't say I never have made recommendations, but in general, I always try to help people see the blocks in their psychology that prevent them from having a clear vision of what they want to do, and to prevent them from being willing to make their own decisions. And so, as I said, I think idolatry of the teacher is very, very unhealthy. It's if you see idolatry of a teacher, you know there's a problem in that spiritual movement. There is simply a problem. Now, as the questioner says, I still like the spiritual movement, though, and I don't want to leave. But that's fine. I mean, then just stay there. You probably are sensing intuitively that there's something you need to learn from your involvement with that movement. Or perhaps you need to help other people see something. So just stay there and see what you can do. Perhaps you can express your own viewpoint. When I was younger, I was very much still in this dualistic state of mind where I thought in terms of right and wrong. So I would say that certain behavior, like for example when I was young, I was very concerned about leaders in spiritual movements not abusing power. Not just the ultimate guru, but also middle managers, as you would call it. And when I saw this, I felt I had to speak out against it. And I had to label it as wrong. But today I would have a much more balanced approach where I would mention it without, going into a all or nothing approach. That either you do what I say or you're wrong, or I have to leave, or whatever you can do. You don't need to put up these conditions. So I would say if you don't want to leave, participate in the movement to the best you can and maybe ask some questions here and there. You don't need to make these black and white declarations or put up these conditions, I realized when I look back at myself that there were situations where I was speaking out about the abuse of power, for example. And from a certain perspective, I was right in the sense that power was being abused. But the way I spoke out about it was immature and unbalanced because I created this drama. My ego had created this drama that this was so wrong that I had to take a stand and say, either this changes or I'm out of here. And that was just ego. So I'm saying if you can avoid that kind of a reaction, you can still participate in the movement. You just interact with people and, perhaps you come to a point where you say, okay, this is it. But I would strongly recommend that you still, in your mind, are open to other teachings. That perhaps for you there will be a next step. And you don't want to miss that if it's in your divine plan that you move on to another teaching at some point. Because this is what you also see as a result of this idolatry. It's like once you accept that this guru is infallible or perfect or the highest possible guru, people think they have to be loyal, not even to the guru, but to their own perception of the guru. I mean, I have seen people, some really scary examples of how there was a certain guru that's known publicly. There's been actually several that were known publicly. And they presented themselves as the highest guru ever, or perfect, or in a higher state of consciousness. And some people accepted that. And then the guru did something that was clearly not from a higher state of consciousness. I mean, you have to be nuts to think this was from a higher state of consciousness. But there are still people who are loyal to the guru, and they find a way to reason that it must have been, maybe it was a test, or maybe it was this, or maybe it was that, And so what I'm saying is this can really become a dead end for people, where they feel that for the rest of their lives they have to be loyal to this guru or this movement or this particular technique, and they can't move on. And all I'm saying is, I'm not saying you should move on, but if you in your divine plan, before you came into embodiment, defined that you should be involved with a certain spiritual movement and guru for a time, and then you should move on to something else, you don't want to miss that. This is what you define. I'm not telling it to you. I'm just telling you, use your intuition instead of this with the outer mind deciding that you have to be loyal to a particular guru. I mean, that's really slowing down your growth. So, so another aspect of this, and I have talked about this before, but no guru is perfect. I mean, they taking every sentence that the teacher said as the Holy Bible, so to speak, it just never happens. The Holy Bible isn't perfect either. There is no outer teaching that can be perfect. And I don't care what you say about this guru or that guru. A guru always has a certain cultural overlay. I mean, when I was 18, my first spiritual movement was Transcendental Meditation, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. It was claimed there he had reached the highest possible level of consciousness. But I came to see after just a few years that clearly the way he approached everything was affected by this cultural overlay from India. And I'm not saying I judged it as being wrong, but I could just see that it wasn't the only way things could be done, but this was the only way he could do it based on his background. And what I'm saying is, this means no guru is perfect. I grew up in the West. Clearly I have a cultural overlay from the West that affects even what I'm able to get from the Ascended Masters. And once you accept that, you can avoid some of this idolatry. Then you can also say that every guru has a certain individuality. And there isn't anything wrong with it as long as it's not abusive, but there isn't anything wrong with it. But it still just shows you that the perfect guru doesn't exist. It's a figment of people's imagination. It's actually a figment of what the ego wants to project. Because the ego wants security, as I talk about in my ego talks about security games. The ego always wants security. And what better security than if you, little you, don't have to make decisions because you just have to follow this perfect guru, and then you will always make the right decisions. You'll always do the right thing and you're guaranteed to ascend in the end. And again, you could say at a certain level of the spiritual path, people need that sense of security. So that's why they are attracted to the kind of gurus who present themselves that way, so they give people that sense of security if they believe in it. And if the guru isn't abusive, I don't really have a problem with it. But there comes a point on the path where you need to look beyond this, and you need to look at gurus who are at a higher level where they don't want you to blindly obey them, they don't want you to take everything they say as gospel, because, as I said, they have realized that the goal of the guru is to make himself or herself superfluous. You don't need them anymore because now you have contact with your higher self and with your ascended masters, and you can go from there. You might still enjoy interacting with the guru or the teachings. You might still get inspiration from it, but you are not suspending your own intuition and your own willingness to make decisions. See, again, you could say, at a certain level of maturity, people aren't ready to make their own decisions. And that's why they want to be in an environment where everything is mapped out for them. Here's what you do, and then you'll make it. But the thing is, this is actually a false promise. I've talked about the inner path and the outer path. The outer path is when they say you do all these outer things and you're going to make it to heaven. It isn't going to happen. Because the only thing that's going to qualify you to enter into heaven or the spiritual realm, whatever you call it, is a shift in your consciousness. And that shift is only going to happen with you looking at yourself, looking at your psychology, looking at being willing to make your own decisions and look at the consequences. That's how you learn. You learn by making a decision, seeing the consequence, saying, okay, do I want more of the same kind of consequence, or do I want more than this? So, again, if you have a spiritual movement where the guru has positioned himself as the perfect guru, you should be cautious. I would strongly recommend being cautious, because it can, first of all, it can lead to abuse, and you need to be very, very aware of that. Is there abuse going on in this movement? Then I might not want to be here, right? But the other thing is, it can become a blind alley where you're suspending your actual growth out of some kind of loyalty to the guru. And the other thing I would say is that there is a tendency that if you idolize a guru, you will have to break down the idol in order to be free, to again take responsibility for yourself. This doesn't happen to everybody, because, as I said, some people, they don't question the idolatry. They go into it and they stay in it for the rest of this embodiment, and they are just blindly loyal to the guru no matter what the guru does or did. But some people who are more committed to growth, they will come to a point where they need to break down the idol, tear down the idol, smash the golden calf, as Moses did when he came down from the mountain, in order to grow. But what I'm saying is that the more mature viewpoint is actually that you realize that it wasn't the guru who forced you to be idolatrous. It was your own psychology, it was your ego. And, as I said, I've now been in this position of being kind of a teacher for 22 years, even though I don't really present myself as such. And I have had people who came to me and idolized me and wanted to idolize me. And I've had several instances where people, after a while, they flipped and now they started breaking down, that I wasn't perfect, that I wasn't this, that I wasn't that. But I had never claimed that I was this. This was something they had projected in their own mind. So what I'm saying is that the higher viewpoint is really that you take responsibility for yourself, realize it was your idolatry that caused you to project, and therefore you can break this down without being mad at the guru. You can just say, okay, it's time to move on, or it's time to have a different relationship to the guru, where instead of having idolatry, I now have a more mature viewpoint. So I can still interact with the guru, maybe still benefit from the guru. And maybe this is what the questioner is sensing from this movement, that if you can transcend the idolatry, perhaps you can interact with the guru in a better way and get more growth out of it. And that's why you don't want to leave the movement. And so, to me, that was the more mature viewpoint, is that you come to a point where it's, okay, I had idolatry of the guru. It was my idolatry, it was my psychology. I need to take responsibility for that, look at what is it in my psychology that wanted me to not make decisions and therefore project that the guru was perfect, so that I can overcome this and without tearing the guru down and making the guru wrong. Because you see some people, right, they go from the one extreme, the guru can't do anything wrong, to the other extreme, the guru can't do anything right. And both of them are unbalanced, and both of them will actually hinder your growth. Because I've seen people who got mad at a certain guru, and as I said, some people, they feel loyal to the guru, they'll spend the rest of their lives being loyal to the guru. I've seen other people get angry with the guru, and now they spend the rest of their lives criticizing the guru, or criticizing the spiritual path, and it's all unreal, and it's all an illusion, they are just trying to get your money and all this stuff. So from one unbalanced reaction to another doesn't really help you grow. So, I don't know, I mean, perhaps there are other things that could be said here, but if it's important for people, then ask me some more questions about it. I do think this is a really important topic. And I think that overall, as we move into the Aquarian age, we as spiritual people are the forerunners for changing the way people view spiritual gurus, spiritual teachings, the relationship between spiritual gurus and students. Because as I've talked about before, we have the Piscean age where we have this very Eastern guru, that the guru is perfect, that he's the ultimate leader. Now we are moving into Aquarius, where, in my view, we need to see that any teacher is just a facilitator that helps you come to a point where you make contact with your inner teacher. And that really changes the fundamental dynamic in spiritual movements. But most spiritual movements haven't even started making that transition, because they're still stuck in the old guru model. So I think there's very much a need for spiritual people to gradually rise to a new guru model, you might say, a new approach to gurus. And I think that's a far-ranging topic that I won't go into here, but I have at least covered some aspects of it.